any wargame, anytime. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Any Wargame Anytime. My name's Bozz, and the band is all back together today. I've got Dan and Sam here. How you guys doing?
Doing
Oh,
great.
another
Doing
day,
great.
another dollar.
Yes, another day in paradise.
Hmm.
Well, we've got something fun planned for today. So I'm looking at getting into the fantasy. I'm looking at specifically getting into Age of Fantasy and Age of Fantasy Regiments. And I've been on Army Forge and I've looked at the factions and the list, and nothing's really jumping out at me. So what we're going to do today is Dan and Sam are going to kind of talk about a couple of factions each and kind of, convince me of why I should go with that one, what makes that one good. And yeah, see if at the end of this episode I've got more of an idea of what kind of fantasy army I want to go for. So without further
Well,
ado, take it away.
I'll go first if you don't mind, Dan. I'll give you the handicap of being able to go second, and hear what I'm doing,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I'm quite
Go ahead.
confident in my selections here.
Mhm.
I've pulled together my knowledge of Boz and what he likes to play, and I've come up with two kind of criteria here for my suggestions. And my criteria are, I was always really inspired by Boz's love of like Imperial Guard being kind of the underdogs of the side of the grimdark kind of universes, the average Joe, somehow surviving against, demonic incursions and
I do love that.
all sorts of other things. So that was my first criteria. The other criteria, and this is something that I've always that is kind of the reverse of what I'm trying to approach, was I'm looking at trying to get a sci-fi army put together, is what armies could reasonably like also be played in a sci-fi setting. And that's something I've enjoyed kind of looking at, because like I have limited time to model in hobby, so which of these could have some things that I think kind of bridge the gap between sci-fi and fantasy. And I've come up with two Age of Fantasy armies that I want to recommend. Now I thought about recommending the underest of the underdogs, which are halflings, but I could not bring myself to put that forward even in jest. The little, short people, no short people, no green people for Sam. And that is my ironclad rules of fantasy in terms of armies that I do. Now green people does not include scales. That's different. Just throwing that out there, because that's yeah, for whatnot. But anyway, without further ado, my two armies that I wanted to suggest are, first of all, my deeply beloved, but tragically underperforming deep sea elves. I love them so much. They're so cool. They're not very good. So, but they could be, and I wanted to put that forward as a suggestion. There's lots of cool model options from both from Mantic, even from Games Workshop, and from a lot of different other companies for stuff you could do for deep sea elves. They are very much underdogs, even underwater underdogs, right? Haha. Um, and I wanted to put that as my first suggestion. And my second suggestion is actually going to be Duchies of Vinci, who just got their new, like OPR has kind of very recently done the STLs for them. They look really good. There's a lot of stuff in the Duchies of Vinci army that would be really convincing in a sci-fi army as well. A lot of the automatons, the various big equipment. In fact, I would, if I was making a Duchies of Vinci army myself, this would be like what I would do is paint them as kind of like almost looking like they're ancient, like the automatons is like this aged bronze. And so like these ancient guardians or something. I've had that idea as a for myself. And so those are my two suggestions. and I'm ready to defend my suggestions against any critique and slander.
Any and all
Uh,
things.
yes, and all right.
And let me just kind of step in a little bit and say that me and Sam are super excited to talk to Boz about this because, you know, this is me and Sam's jam. Like we are big fantasy players. Me and Sam actually met through the Kings of War community, and both of us are Warhammer Fantasy castaways who've sort of navigated this adventure that we've been on. And it's been an adventure. I think even the last time we were talking, this Age of Sigmar, like fantasy, there's just a lot of crazy news in this space. And I love that Boz is getting interested. It's sort of like I know Boz is a 40K player, and I I would say this. I'm going to really give a lot of support for one of Sam's armies, and that's Duchy of Vinci. I think that they are I'm not picking Duchy of Vinci's for you, Boz, but they're humans. And it's funny because as much as the 40K lore is good, I actually like regular humans in fantasy better than 40K. I don't know. They feel like they really have their place in the like they're not quite as big as maybe the Imperium is. They're still sort of scrappy. It's like I know, Boz, you really enjoy sort of that scrappiness and that underdog feel and the power level of the Empire in Warhammer Fantasy is a little less so than like maybe 40K. Um, there, the first thing that I would, always suggest to Boz is one, look at the Warhammer Fantasy lore. And Duchies of Vinci, I think, are good. I would pick humans. I think that regular humans right now are doing so good. Because here's what I think. I think that for fantasy, we're in such an interesting space. There's so many good games out there for fantasy that I love the idea, especially in fantasy, of that your models really can have um a lot of triple dipping, right? You can take these same models and you can play them in multiple different settings. Um it's funny in 40K, I'm very much a Xeno sort of guy and base Space Marine. But when it comes to fantasy, I played Kingdoms of Men or Kings of War for years. I love the Kingdoms of Men. I love men in fantasy. And so one of my suggestions is sort of dovetailing with what Sam is going for, and that's Duchies of Vinci. I'm not going to suggest Duchies of Vinci. I'm going to suggest the much more powerful um, human empire in Age of Fantasy, and they are powerful. If I could put a tier list together for Age of Fantasy OPR, yeah, I mean, Human Empire just right up there. They're almost
Yeah,
S
they're
tier, I
real good.
really think. Yeah, they're just
And
bonkers
and
good.
they also just got a bunch of STL updates
Mhm.
as well. So
So
and their stuff also looks
yeah.
real good.
So they're all in my library already, which is quite an advantage.
Quite an
Yeah,
advantage.
and I mean, and like, so you could, but play, I think Duchies of Vinci, I agree with Sam, like, but you could take Duchies of Vinci and you could like play that you could play that in
Yeah.
like,
You could
you
there's a
could, you
lot
could
of
play that in Kings
equivalents.
of War. You could play it in, you could play it in Age of Sigmar if you like it, or you could play it in, Old World. So, because that's the great thing about humans in a fantasy game, that you really can do a lot. I think that the Duchess of Vinci line could be used in different games, and I think there is a little more flavor with the Duchy. Like I like Human Empire because I want you really to dig into some of that lore. If I would really suggest for Boz, there's a YouTube channel called Book of Choyer, which is a guy who does a lot of lore. He does a lot of really good fantasy lore that can it's like really good into just And then, of course, playing the Warhammer Total War games are just a great way to just easily dive into this lore. Um,
Well,
so
from
the
a model
first thing,
perspective too, there's also a lot of like Human Empire and Duchies of Vinci. There's a lot of stuff that you could put in either army, like from a
yeah,
model perspective. Even a lot of like the machine stuff, like this, the steam tanks can be, or battle wagons and such can be um, the Caro Armato, the support wagons or the artillery. Could be in either army.
hmm so I'll pick Human Empire, and it's funny. Me and Sam didn't talk about this before, but Human Empire is what I would actually suggest to you. And I mean, Human Empire, and then pick a fantasy faction that you like. Kislev, Reichland. I mean, you could maybe like a Sylvania themed one. Like that'd be something kind of interesting. I mean, just Mootland, right? You go with there's some halflings if you wanted it. The Sam is shaking his head like no, but no,
No.
like there's so many great known. There's so many great Warhammer cities that like you just hear these and they have their own just lore. I mean, the White Line. I mean, how about just a White Wolf Ulrich themed empire, right? I mean,
Oh
that'd be
boy, and
great.
especially if you could track down some of those, they're super expensive.
Oh,
But those
those
old
White Wolf.
the like big hammer guys, I can't remember what they were called,
Uh,
that were such gorgeous models, and they've been out of print for so long that they are super expensive. But
I'm sure there's
mhm.
SPLs for them.
yes,
Yeah, even
probably, or
even
at least good
just
equivalents.
yeah, even just Sigmar. I mean, even just going the sort of the religious route. Hey, Sigmar, and you got some priests. So I would say Human Empire, and I just Bozz. It's like there that would be one. So how about another pick? Another. It's funny that Sam brought up elves, and me and Sam didn't communicate so with this. But Sam, I have to go for dark elves. I think that. I think Boz, you like Eldar. I remember Boz, you did like Eldar as your original OG thing. And
Yeah,
now
absolutely.
Sam's a high elf player. Um,
Yeah,
but
which means that dark elves are another recommendation I can't give in good faith anymore.
yeah, it's funny. But no, I think that it's funny, like, because Drukari to me in 40K were always like, I come from pre-dark. Remember, I come from pre-dark pre uh uh Drukari 40K, right? When they were the original pirates, and actually they actually had their own rules. It's just part of the Eldar. But the great thing about Dark Elves, they're part of the lore day one in fantasy. Their lore to me is much more rich than even the Drakari lore, which I think is good, but it's sort of like I can never really truly appreciate the 40K Drakari lore because the Dark Elf lore is so good. And it's because it's just baked into the pie, right? The world is sort of built from the ground up. And Dark Elves actually, they feel like Eldar in the sense that they've got Kane. They're a lot more of that sort of combat focused. I say this as someone who's always wanted to play Dark Elves, but and so I'm sort of living vicariously through you. They're like, I would love to have a Dark Elf army. So I would pick Dark Elves, like their lore. It's kind of like it's a little bit of Eldar because they are also sort of like they're off in the corner and they're a little more struggling as well for Dark Elves. Like they're not it feels a little more like Eldar to me. High elves to me in fantasy, I love them, but they've always sort of just been like, I don't not bland, but they're sort of towing the line. And I don't know. I know Sam is going to disagree, but I would say
Oh
this:
yeah,
like, I
Sam's getting
think that
triggered here.
Buzz, you'd really like Dark Elves as a fantasy. I think they've just one thing I think once you start, especially as an Eldar player, once you start digging into their lore, digging into their models, you're just really going to enjoy Dark Elves. So yeah,
We'll say
I'll let Sam respond to me.
dark elves do get. I'll give you this. They get some good monster stuff they have hydras. Hydras are one of my favorite fantasy monsters of all time. They get the Raptor Knights, which are also really cool. And but you're way off, man, if you say that high elf lore is bland. We are
Well,
high elves are awesome. We have, like, you get into like the I mean it was so fascinating to me to have this country, this kind of high elf kingdom that is and these different regions that are very different and distinct from each other, and how they operate, and like how they, uh both in kind of the from a gameplay perspective and the units that they put forward, but also like their culture. And so you like, Crace is very different than the Shadowlands, or from Illyria, or
mhm.
like, and it was always so interesting. And you get really cool characters too in the high elf lore. Teclis and Tyrion just being really interesting. Um, and Eltharion, another super fascinating character.
Yeah, like I think the high elf lore for me, it's good. I guess to me, them I never liked that they were just on their own island. And like dark elves always have, to me, they always feel like they're more heavily involved in the world because they're pirating and they've got those
Because
pirate
they
side.
send out slave ships. They go
Yeah, yeah,
capture
and they've got
slaves.
the pirating side of it. Then they of course got their dealings with the Slan, and they've got chaos next to them as well. They have of course got high elves. They're very to me in fantasy, high elf dark elves were always very scrappy. They're
Yeah.
very just sort of like they're not the top dogs, but like they're just going over there. And I don't know. I think
Well, the high
it's
elves
the
are very
same thing as
isolationist.
Drakari. It's just it's yeah, it's very grounded.
Yeah. The high elves were always kind of like very isolationist in their policies, and especially like post War of the Beard, they
Mhm.
where all of their outposts basically had to be abandoned, and they just kind of retreated back to Ulthuan. Um, yeah, they're very very non and they don't really have a lot to do with the other races of the old world.
Well, it's sort of like high elves. I can understand why people like them. Because the whole thing, one of the great things about high elves is that people who play them, they have sort of not like, I'm going to say it this way, like a lot of high elf players I know, they have a little bit of like an arrogance, as in the sense that we've got our own island and we're going to grace you on this. We're going to come off this battlefield. We're going to grace you with our, because that's what the high elves really do in fantasy. They've got their island and but they're like, oh, I'm going to come clean up one. I need to come here to the old world or here and there to clean up someone's mess, right? And there is always sort of that undertone with high elves that I can see why people like them, because it's very interesting, because that's a lot of how they
Well,
play in the lore is they are sort of showing up to, oh, I've got to go help the lesser beings.
yeah. Well,
So I'm
they're
leaving my
also
awesome little island here. Yeah.
Those humans are at it again. Ugh.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're also
exactly.
they're also very much though the empire in decline, right? I mean, their golden age is gone, and they're even if they don't always admit that, they're cognizant of the fact that like their empire is not coming back, and their race itself may die out eventually.
Hmm.
And so there's this kind of, if you like yearning, like looking back at the glory days, especially as your elves, your lifespans, like you have people who lived in those days, and remember the ancient days of of when the high elves were truly great, and now they're just being kind of a shadow of what they used to be. And it's
Well,
this kind of like sorrow that accompanies that as well, but also this like duty that we still have to guide the younger races and
I
and
love
try
that.
to
See,
kind
that's
of.
what I mean right
I
there.
know,
There's
I
just
know.
that younger, and no, that's fine. And like, I understand where they're coming from, but like,
Oh, I
that's
get
high
I
elf
get it
play.
too. That's just how
Yeah,
I feel.
they're
Like,
like, and people who enjoy high elves, they are just that. And like, I think arrogance is too strong. It's not that word, but there is a certain like superiority that oftentimes is merited, comes from high elf players. No, I agree. I I would say this. The other thing is that it's funny that you're talking about the decline because Dark Elves to me are also scrappy just in reality, in that it's like you got this awesome, cool race, and it seems like every one of the model makers just hate them. Like Kings of War, I mean, the Twilight Kin saga into itself is just so sad that they've just Kings of War, they've had these Twilight Kin as sort of this as what it was almost like a what's the word? It's back and forth about experimental armies. And then they finally come out with a what they call Twilight Kin army. And they basically it's a completely different army than even Dark Elves. And they've thrown away all the Dark Elf units. And
Now
it's
there
like
are some.
I mean, like I could just imagine those Dark Elf players who are like, we finally get our official book, and wait, none of our models matter anymore. What? So
that is correct, and there are some good, especially third-party companies like for model lines for Dark Elves, especially if you want to spend money. But we'll assume money's not an issue. Game Zone has really fantastic pewter Dark Elf models. They're expensive, and but their raptors look really, really good. And I've been less impressed with Games Workshop's Dark Elves, and Mantic's Dark Elves aren't even real Dark Elves, so they're stupid.
actually correct. Actually is correct in that, right?
Yeah, it's they so badly at Mantic need to fire older sculptors and hire people who understand basic realistic proportions of a humanoid, right? And just stop with the people whose heads are disproportionately bigger than their bodies. I mean, it's so bad. It looks so bad. It's hard to look at just because it's like, why would you do that? I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, well, and the other thing too, I think with Dark Elves is that like I don't know why, but all the companies are giving them the shaft. Like even the old world, they're bringing High Elves back, and they're saying, "Oh, Dark Elves are technically kind of an insular race." That they're not involved in politics, and like, but they're bringing High Elves back, who
But
are
their
literally
involvement in
across the
politics is
pond.
we raid places and take slaves.
So our opening salvos, Bozz. What do you
Well,
think?
well. Let me just reiterate that I also had no kind of prior communication with Dan or Sam about anything as well. So there's a couple of assumed premises that you've gone with, which are Bozz likes the underdog, Bozz likes regular humans kind of standing against a world and a universe full of horrors that they have no business standing against. And yeah, that's spot on. That's absolutely my jam. I kind of thought about doing something a bit different for fantasy. I thought, if I'm going fantasy, I might as well go full fantasy. I might, something like one of the three factions of undead, or like lizards, or something like that. And I tell you, you've made some really good points about the Duchies of Vinci. I love this idea of having rusty automatons and having it kind of be like this version of an empire in decline. I think that could look really, really cool. And I know what pretty much all those models look like because I'm on OPR's Patreon and they've been releasing them. I love the idea of Dark Elves. As you guys know, I'm doing a 40k third edition project at the moment, and one of the factions is the Dark Eldar. So I'm kind of leaning in towards that Dark Eldery, Dark Elfy type thing anyway. So that really does appeal to me, and I do love their lore in Warhammer: The Old World. So I did play a bit of Warhammer back in the day, and the factions, funnily enough, that I played were High Elves and Men of the Empire. And just, I played High Elves because they were one of the two factions that came in the 8th edition box, and I didn't want to be Skaven. And I then moved on to Men of the Empire because that's where my kind of interests actually lay, which is, as you know, very much in keeping with my kind of take on war games in general is I very much like to just be the regular person looking around going, what is going on?
One day I was a farmer, you know, and
Yeah,
then they came into town and said, we need bodies,
yeah,
and
you're a soldier
oh,
now, boy.
here we are now. What are these you know, monstrosities that we're having to fight against? Like, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah. But I do love your idea, Dan, of doing something quite niche with Human Empire. Not just doing Human Empire, but doing something. I specifically liked the idea of doing Kislev, because Kislev was something that I read about in a White Dwarf years and years and years and decades ago when they were just releasing Tsar Boris. And you know, Boris on his pole there riding into battle. I loved that model, and then I kind of found out more about Kislev. And by the time I got into actually playing fantasy, they discontinued the line, which was a bit sad.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if I was going to do Human Empire, I would do something kind of niche like that, like pick a city, you know, read it as you suggested, read up on the lore, pick a city, and really lean heavily into that. I can't see going deep sea elves because it smacks of Aquaman, and I have a fiery loathing for Aquaman and everything related to it. So that's pretty much everything under the sea out for me forever. However, I kind of it kind of appeals to me the idea of doing a halfling army, and
Resist, Bozz, resist.
it's almost as much for the fact that I think it could be stupidly fun and cool as it is that I know it's just it's going to make you cringe every time I talk about it.
Well, let's talk about your picks, because maybe we can. So, because there's two things you were looking at. Correct me if I'm wrong. So you said Saurians and an undead faction.
Yeah.
Was that correct?
Yeah.
So,
I thought about
maybe we can
recommending
flesh out the
Saurians, too.
undead. I think that's a great. What do you think about that, Sam? You want
So
to flesh out?
I wouldn't do undead. I think undead are just too overdone, and I think that undead are too much the army that breaks the normal rules of the game.
They
And
always have some sort of regen. They always have slow. They always have
yeah, they don't break in combat, right? Because you're undead, right?
Yeah,
It's I would hesitate to sell somebody to get into an undead as their first army, just because like you're gonna get used to things that no other army has, you know. And I've seen like even back in Warhammer Fantasy days, people struggle to switch from undead to other non-undead armies and just not be able to like do anything because they're used to like a certain way of playing that just doesn't work outside of being undead.
I guess that isn't such a big a factor for me. I quite like the armies that I play to be quite different from one another, which is why I'd bother
Sure.
playing it if I'm. But if I was a brand new player, then I can absolutely see the point of not picking something that's so niche that not much of it will transfer over to something else.
I think just right now, you know, with Old World coming out and we've got Kimry, right, being one of the main factions. I think that could change in the future, because I can definitely understand where Sam is coming from. Kings of War, undead are just, both of the undead factions are just overdone. You know, we're like, so all in there, but even in fantasy, like the Warhammer side of things, there's a lot of Kimry out there. But I think in the future that could die out, and that you could find something. If you're going to do undead,
I'm just generally uninspired by undead model lines too.
I think that the OPR has done a good line. What I would say, Bozz, is like if you're going to do undead, they're always they're the hero hammer army. They're sort of your troops are really there just to be there to protect your heroes. And I can understand the appeal of that, right? That there are people who really enjoy playing those. If you want to play armies in fantasy games where your heroes really feel heroic. That's undead, because you basically have these
You get a
vampires
vampire.
and necromancers, and they're the central piece of the army. And I can see why people like it. It's not my particular cup of tea, but I can also make a lot of people like it a lot. And I think it's just choosing your flavor. Do you like mummified undead? Do you like vampiric? I know
Well,
that
yeah,
OPR breaks it down even
yeah,
more so.
I'll also say that yeah, they do a third faction that's like purely zombies or something like that as well. And I will
Mhm.
say that even though I love their model line for the vampiric undead, I'm much more drawn to doing something mummified undead, Egyptian themed, if I was to go the undead route.
Yeah. And
And
to me, I think
the
that's
OPR, yeah, mummified undead are pretty good looking too.
Yeah, I'll reiterate that I'm never going to play Old World. These are
yeah.
like the lore, and we talked about this a lot. The lore that comes out of Games Workshop is usually the superior lore to be going with because it's had decades to be fleshed out, and most of it is really, really well done. But
Yeah, the Kimry lore was always really good. Like I have like I briefly played Tomb Kings for a while. And I have one of the Tomb King army codexes. Like it's really good.
I never really care. I'll kind of diverge from Sam. One of the great things about me and Sam, we always disagree, and that's just the wonderful thing about us. I don't like the Khemri lore. I feel me personally, I just feel it's a little too on the nose. Just a little too, you know, Egypt switch out names, sort of thing. I don't I get it. No, it's fine. That's my own. I'm also not a big Egyptian. That's not my particular jive in just history. Me and Sam are both history buffs, and I think that Egyptian lore has a very rich history that you like it, and it's just not my preference. No, I like the volcanic. I mean, I like vampires as far as just it's sort of kind of like with high elves. They're in the setting. Sylvania is sort of plopped right in the middle of the empire. So you have just you've got these vampires. They're involved in the lore. You've got Mordheim, who's which is that lore, and so I guess I like that. But I mean,
oh,
Mummified, yeah,
I very
yeah,
much do as well. And back in the day, I wrote out a list for vampire lords intending to get into it. I don't. And again, like we're doing this because I've looked at all these factions and nothing's jumped out at me, including Vampiric Undead. And I looked really hard at them because I already have all those models in my catalog. And I looked at the rules and I built a few lists, and I was just like, yeah, I mean, I could, but they didn't spring out at me.
They feel too like this is every undead army. I mean, it's
yeah,
hard. I feel like it's hard to be unique. Now, I one of your other things you mentioned was Saurians, and Saurians are the one of my top armies that I would love to do for OPR, and one of the reasons is because they are both in sci-fi and in fantasy. You could pretty easily have a lot of stuff that could be fantasy or sci-fi. They look good, and Saurians gives you a lot of, even if you're using just the same, the OPR models, from a hobby perspective, you get a lot of opportunities to really be unique and customize your stuff. Because when you're painting, lizard people, right, you get the added benefit of like you can really color your lizards however you want.
right.
Yeah.
And so really make it a really interesting theme. I mean, what I would be doing if I do the Saurian army is going to be like basing would be desert, and I grew up. I was born in Tucson, Arizona. Smack in the middle of desert city that can only exist in the modern world. And I love the desert, and I love the you get some really interesting lizards there. And be like a lot of like desert theme, but like with turquoise and such, just really interesting looking. But then you can also do, a friend Justin has kind of a snowy lizard army,
Yeah.
and
That's what I was thinking about.
But and there's like a whole bunch of others you could do. So you could have, you could be at a tournament with 10 lizard players, and they can literally all be completely different
Yeah.
in terms of their visually anyway, because you could just you can paint your lizards any any
Yeah.
color and kind of and you can really then get into some interesting color combinations and color theory and such. It's
Which is wonderful. However, I am most certainly not a painter. I do tabletop standard. But
But tabletop,
having said that, I do like the idea of picking a theme, like going, yeah, I'm doing tropical lizards, I'm doing desert lizards, I'm doing lizards that
Yeah.
are the color that were around where I grew up as a kid.
Well, they're a good.
But
I think
that's
they're a
also
good
the-
army for being a tabletop standard.
yeah, exactly. They're one of those armies, especially OPR. Like I like their line of. I mean, to me, the Lizardman line Saurians for OPR, they're basically they're basically the same theme of what the GWs are, which I think is fine, right? I mean, it's a great, the Aztec-y sort of thing is great, but you're right, they're very easy to paint because it's sort of like a lot of nids.
It's got a lot of texture. You got
a lot of texture, wash, dry brush, and
Yeah, I think
the model can
the
sort of do a
model
lot
can
for
go as-
you.
Yeah, the painting can go as deep as you want it to go because it is highly detailed. But it'll also benefit well from a base coat, a highlight, the dry brush, and the wash, and off it go.
Yeah,
Mhm.
anything with scales makes it really easy to do that with.
Yeah,
I think the great thing about the one-page rules is that it's like Lizardmen are one of those factions that GW hasn't given a lot of love to for many years. And so the Saurians are a very welcome addition from OPR. Like they really are taking they're really giving them the love that a lot of people who play GW Lizardmen are really playing with some pretty old models that are all sort of your stock same, poses. So, and I think the OPR, sorry, it's just that dynamism and that modernism that is nice, especially the Gators. I just love the Gators for the OPR.
And that's another army that has Kings of War equivalents that Mantic also has never really paid attention to.
So
honestly,
yeah, I love that. Like that's a serious contender. I think Dark Elves would be if there was a model line that really jumped out at me. And you guys were talking about it before. The Kings of War stuff looks a little silly, and the GW stuff looks fine, but I expect more than
it's
fine.
dated too.
Yeah, I expect more than fine from GW because for all their faults, they by and large make really good movies.
I think
It's a
some
lot
of
of
the
stuff
Age
that
of
hasn't been updated in a while.
the Age of Sigmar, like it's funny, it's true, but like I think the Age of Sigmar stuff for High Elves, for Dark Elves is great, but you're right, they don't have that comprehensive model line is the problem. Yeah. So
And of
yeah,
course, anything that I do will be printed, so it needs to be a line that I can find and print.
Like there are some good. There's probably some good third party Dark Elf lines, but you would have to go digging. Like you'd have to like spend some time like looking through different model lines and figuring out like, oh, I want this stuff for this unit or whatever.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm willing to dig. What I'm looking for is the spark. The spark that gets me interested and goes, yeah, I'm definitely doing this one. Like a spark that got me really into the Eldar back in the day was I saw a avatar of Kane, and I was like, that's a brilliant model. That's a brilliant piece. Look at the rules for it. He's awesome. I'm going to build my entire fort. It's like that's the kind of spark I'm looking for with a fantasy. I mean, that's kind of why I left Vampiric Undead on the shelf, because they just, even though they do look really cool, I love the models and they do have some really cool rules and everything. It's nothing jumped out at me, and I think I could probably look at a Saurian group of models and go, I can build something from that. I could look at Duchies of Vinci, now that you've given me the idea, and say I could picture them covered in rust there, an empire in decline that's come out of the marshes, no one's even remembered they exist, and that could be really cool.
Well, and OPR, this is one of their their big factions that they had the latest
Yeah.
campaign, Secrets of Tashal, and so they're getting the love they need. And I think that's awesome. The model line for Sars, like the army list itself in OPR is very good. Sam has played Saurians and they do very well. They're like, even in Grimdark Future, the Saurians a really solid list.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that also you're not an overpowered faction, but they are. And if you can, like, have you read any of the fantasy lore for Saurians?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a quirky sort of lore. Like,
Mm.
it's always sort of, I always find it a little hypocritical that they're supposed to be this advanced faction, that they're so thoughtful and so we're above these silly humans, and yet they're literally enslaving their own kind, like with dinosaurs riding dinosaurs.
Oh, I know.
So,
It's
Well, then
it's always a nice
it's
bit of satire.
and I always enjoyed kind of in Lizardmen and GW too, where well, the old ones kind of left us here. We're not really sure what to do though.
We're just gonna kinda
Without
trust-
them.
Yeah, we're just gonna try and just kind of gonna trust the slam to tell us what to do, and I'm sure they know what they're up to.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think in the end, it's still not clear, but I'm leaning very heavily towards Duchies of Vinci or the Saurians. You know what, Sam? I'll leave halflings on the shelf.
Just for the drama, right?
No, as much as the idea of doing something funny like that appeals to me, I don't think I'd commit to doing a full force of it. I think I'd probably do a unit and show them, go, look at my new unit of halflings. I'm building a whole army. And that would kind of be my
duchies are, yeah, duchies are so cool because you can, like, they really are, I think, a super unique faction from OPR. Like, there's something I think that they came, like, that's their own thing, and it works. Like, you don't see a lot of Italian themed stuff that I think is
Well, look at automata, based armies
like,
too are
it's
something that's actually like they actually a fantasy niche that OPR hits that I think very few people actually hit.
Yeah, absolutely. They went, oh look, Leonardo da Vinci drew some really cool stuff. Let's turn it into an army. What shall we call it? No one stretched any creative muscles there, but it still works. So yeah, I think I'll take a look at both of those lines, which have the added advantage of being very recent OPR lines, and see what I can come up with. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I was anticipating some good back and forth, and you guys did not disappoint at all.
Well, we like I said, we're really looking forward to, like, as fantasy players, me and Sam, it's a whole, like, 40K is good, but there is just this whole world where fantasy, yeah, it's such a great world just to play in.
Yeah, and sci-fi has been my main focus, kind of forever. So it'll be really nice to branch out into fantasy, and maybe soon we can do another one of these episodes for Sam for a sci-fi army.
Yeah, I would
yes.
appreciate that. We should definitely do that. I'll that'd be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, closing thoughts.
Nothing jumps out. Good luck, and definitely keep us posted.
Yeah,
and if I can find any good third party lines, I'll send them your way.
Yeah,
for any of these as well, to see if anything sparks that kind of creative. They got that creative spark.
I just need that spark. Once it's there, I'll take it and run.
Yeah,
love it.
All right. Well, until next time, Sam, what do you say?
Oh boy, I think this is going to be my job every time now, isn't it?
Oh yes.
Go where the game is good, guys.
Any war game, anytime. Going where the game is good.